I'm Coco and I have ideas. So today we're going to be talking about how the political era that we are currently living through is the widespread violation to patriarchal fantasies, right? That is the political era that we're living through collectively and experiencing the reckonings of the fantasies collapsing on individual levels, collective social levels. It's happening everywhere, baby. So our political landscape obviously reflects that. It's reflecting the ongoing collapse of patriarchal fantasy and the reckoning that we are having for the realities of patriarchal dynamics that do not match up with the fantasy sold. Okay. So in this video, we're going to talk about what are patriarchal fantasies, right? How it's a coin, and one side of the coin is sold to men, one side is sold to women, and it's all collapsing. Good times. Yeah, so we'll discuss the breakdown in patriarchal currencies, right, that require the total overhaul of values of self and relatedness. And just quick note, we're talking about patriarchal fantasies here, right? And one of the patriarchal fantasies is assumes that the default is heterosexual man, heterosexual woman, right? Your sex determines your social role at birth. It's not about authenticity or truth or being yourself. It's about perpetuating the social order of man owns woman as means of production and sexual property. So obviously that in itself is a construct, right? That erases all gay, queer, trans people, all non-patriarchal identities. And non-patriarchal identities are very important and valuable. Trans rights are human rights. But in this video, I am focusing on on the patriarchal fantasy where it's at. So I'm going by their dichotomy a bit here. So please have patience with me and understand that I'm not supporting the erasure of everyone. I'm just meeting the fantasy where it's at. To deconstruct it! Man, I hate patriarchy. Cool, so let's get into it. What is the patriarchal fantasy? Patriarchy is the culture of male narcissism. Woo! And we're all conditioned into it. So women are very capable of being patriarchal and promoting this culture as well. We're all conditioned into it, need to rip it out. All the ways we've been socialized to perpetuate it and expect male narcissism in all realms of our life. So it is male narcissism in that being human is seen as being man, right? Like that is the default. All of our society, all of our culture, it's really, really centered on men, right? Any benefit of the doubt, that's going to go to a man. There are a million examples. You can Google them. Yeah, and so in that idea where men are the default, women are something else, something less than, like an appendage meant to serve the needs of man, right? It needs to be feeding him. He's the centered one, right? And the culture of male narcissism promotes codependence as the traditional gender norm, right? Women does all the work of meeting basic human needs. Man consumes it, goes out into the world, lives his life, focusing on the higher pursuits of life, education, passion, hobbies, right? And the entire time he's consuming her work, meeting all basic needs. And that is the foundation of strength and love. It's not. Love only exists between two whole people. It doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but it means that you're not together out of a codependence to survive, right? Wounded people are very capable of loving relationships because we're all a little wounded. Patriarchy exists. Of course we are. Anyway, so the hallmark of narcissism is fantasy, right? And this is for anyone that has narcissistic personality disorder. And I'm saying that patriarchy is a collective, is society having male narcissistic personality disorder and making everyone function within that. So the fundamental fantasy of narcissism is that the person is innately superior to others. And this innate superiority, that's just X factor, born with it, baby, Yeah, that grants them the entitlement to exploit others, to manipulate others, to harvest others. They can only, everything is me, 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 me. There's no concern for stewardship, fairness, treating people appropriately. You can only perceive others by whether they're going to be beneficial to your fantasies and your desires, like what can I get out of them, right? Or if they're gonna be harmful. Like, is this somebody who's gonna challenge your fantasies, challenge your manipulations? Then they gotta go. They cannot, because your fantasy must be protected at all times. And the fantasy of superiority, it's not about competing and demonstrating like how you are superior. No, 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 no. It's about seeking to manipulate others, coerce others, charm others, seduce others, violently demean others, so that they play out your fantasy. They play the part of inferior. They play the part of pouring into you, like you're some lord of the castle. Oh, my lord, meh, so grateful to be in your presence. Like that's what they want. They want the admiration, right? And whatever they got, if they can charm it into you playing that back for them, best. Love it. But, you know, if they have to degrade you, exploit you, lie about you, harm you, because you won't play along, so that they can exile you or punish you for violating the fantasy, that's just how it has to go, baby. So it's not great. It's not great. So that level of narcissism and that like vicious fantasy and the will to impose that fantasy on others, that's at the heart of patriarchy. It's at the collective scale where men are conditioned to believe that they're entitled to do such things. And it's terrible. Yeah, so it's the birthright of entitlement that is not true, right? And so under patriarchy, the male entitlement is to consume without contribution, right? Patriarchy creates narcissistic consumers out of men. It's gross. So, yeah, and it also, so I just checking my notes. So what we see is the entitlement to consumption without contribution, and for men expect to be deferred to and treated as leaders and the arbiter of value. Their perspective is correct. Their opinion is correct. If you challenge them, you just don't know nothing about rationality. It doesn't matter that he has no idea what he's talking about. It doesn't matter that like investing in the knowledge to understand the system that he's like spewing opinions about. No, no, no. It's his vibe. It's his feelings. And they're all superior to yours, right? It's not great. Ultimately, it's the fantasy that men were born to be teachers and leaders without ever having to be students. Like that's at the core of it, right? And that it is women's job to perform back inferiority and to perform their superiority back to them. So these overgrown teenagers that have not gone through the processes of maturity or skill cultivation or knowledge, they want to be treated. It's women's job to make them feel superior by doing all the work and then being like, you're so right, leader. I loved your notes about my dinner last night. Thank you for telling me that I used too much garlic. You've never cooked a meal for me in the last 20 years, but I am so grateful to know how my efforts aren't enough for you, cultivated leader. Like, that's the vibe. It's garbage. Yeah. And it's all to avoid the discomfort of intentional creation, right? Because if you submit to the learning process, you engage meaningfully with learning things and like cultivating skills, that's gonna knock the innate superiority right off your shoulder, right? And that's not a bad thing. That's a beautiful thing. It is a beautiful process of knowledge and creation and maturity. But patriarchy's like, nah, dudes, you don't do that. You babies are the Nepo babies. You belong on top. Women were born to do that labor. Just take it from them. Just take it from them. So it's not great, right? And a byproduct of this dynamic is that men see themselves as consumers, right? They haven't created authority. They consume authority by their birthright, right? And their authority comes from consuming the energy and labor of women without any meaningful compensation or reciprocity, right? And in their minds, I am the authority because I am the consumer. The customer is always right. The customer is king. So for men to have the superiority that entitles them to consumption without contribution, while on the flip side of that, women have to be the manufacturers for male consumption, right? Somebody's got to be producing things for them to consume. And that's not great. Yeah, women are forced then to be the manufacturers, the creators, and the means of production for life, to be the factory of meeting basic needs, sexual needs, and performing his fantasy back to him, right? So that's why patriarchy is literally a system of male, private, for-profit ownership of women as the means of production. And both in terms of creating raw life and then all the work, the daily work, the infrastructure of living. That's all for women, for men to consume from women without meaningful contribution. Or like most men don't even like bother in investing in learning how to make a meal for themselves, right? Like that is how much they feel entitled to just consume needs. Like how many single men only eat frozen dinners because they can't even like find the intrinsic motivation to learn the skill to cook for their own benefit, right? That's how ingrained it is. That's women's work. Meeting needs, creating value, manufacturing value. That's all women's work for male consumption. It's not great. And yeah, that's the main fantasy. So let's talk about the patriarchal fantasy sold to women, the other side of the coin, right? How do we seduce women into this patriarchal standard? Because that's the ideal step, right? Seduce women is step number one. And what they try, the message of the seduction, right? Like with all trad wife content and all, 1950s housewife style stuff, it's all that service is your love. That you express love by serving the man's needs first and foremost. And the implicit promise is you lovingly devote yourself to meeting all needs, right? His needs, the family's needs, any dependents, whether that's elderly, children, whatever. You take on all needs related to directly meeting human life. Food, emotional needs, like the whole shebang-a-bang, right? That is your job. And you lovingly invest this into your man, your brother, your household, whatever, right? And that by becoming service incarnate, joyfully and lovingly, pouring your energy, prioritizing the needs of the whole above your own self, right? You're not selfish. You put the needs of the family first. You put the needs of the situation first. How can we act cooperatively to get X, Y, and Z accomplished so that we can go on to bigger and better, right? That's all women, and if you pour yourself into that completely and lovingly and cheerfully, right? You do that all. Well, then in response, he's gonna be your rock. He's gonna be your partner. He's gonna be your confidant, your protector, and everything that he consumes from you so that he can go out and do higher level things in the world, career, investments, creativity, hobbies, whatever. By consuming what you do, everything he does based on consuming your efforts and labor that frees him up for these higher level things, well, those successes are your successes too. They really are. You prioritize the family, you held it down, he's your partner. When it is too much, when the world is too much, when the responsibilities are too overwhelming and you are breaking, you can reach out and say, help me, help me. And you've already given so much, of course, he's gonna love and value you. Of course. The money that he was able to make from having all of his needs met so he could just focus on that money's for you too, babe. You are equal partners in that marriage. So his ability to perform in career, that's your money too. You get to spend it how you want to, right? You get really sick and you need help around the house. You need help for whatever reason. The demands of life are too much. You need more of his participation. His emotional presence. You need him to pour into you so that you may continue doing your work. Well, of course he's going to do that, right? Of course. Your parents are really sick. Your mom is dying. You are on call for hospice care. Your brother's gonna stand there with you, right? Shoulder to shoulder. You're gonna do it together. You grew up together. This is your mother, of course. Of course, right? Think of all the times you had his back. Went out of your way, sacrificed for him, of course. But that's not what happens, is it? No. None of that pans out. And there's no appropriate way to cry, plead, beg, reason, persuade him to match you in contributions, to be present, to contribute and not just consume. There's no right way that he will respect and hear you and choose to do it. If he's a patriarchal man, some men will choose to do that work, and that is amazing. They are going against the grain of patriarchy. They do exist. I'm gonna meet one day. If you are one, you single? No, I'm kidding. Woo, look at me trolling. Anyway, so yeah, most times they abandon, they consume and they abandon with petulance, right? Because his end of the deal, his end of the partnership, where I consume and then I will be reliable to you as well. In like whatever realm that looks like. When you need me, I will be there. You've given me so much. It doesn't pan out like that. Because the promises of partnership, or we're in this together, whether it's romantic, platonic, like whatever the deal was, his end of the deal was all performance. It was all ego fantasy that he was spitting out. Because it felt good to tell you in that moment, yes, make these promises. It felt so good and romantic, and look at me, I'm a male lead right here. But those words were all checks. He never had any intention to cash. Zero. It was all performance, right? So he eats up everything that she does, conditioned that this is what you do for love, and that he will be the partnership and the rock in return. And then when it's time for him to be relied upon, to contribute, to participate, disappears. And it's a problem, right? It was all just to make him feel better, right? So her fantasy of patriarchy is broken when he abandons her, right? When it is his turn to step up and he abandons her. And often it's done with a lot of gaslighting, because he won't take accountability. He can't, that goes against the fantasy of innate superiority. And as you're saying, no, you can have irrefutable proof, X, Y, and Z, you need to participate in these ways. That's your job. What do you think? You don't do enough. He'll attack her in defense of his abandonment. And it's to prevent him from having to do work. That is it. Because he sees himself as an entitlement to just consume. And then, I performed the idea of a good man when I spit all those words about how we're in partnership. But now that you're actually asking me to do it, wow, you're a witch, you're not good enough, you've never been a good enough housekeeper, you didn't do this good enough, you didn't do this. It's all deflection, right? And that breaks the patriarchal fantasy for her. It's broken. That abandonment, that deflecting viciously and attacking her, why would she be worth putting effort into? The way he pushes it all back because he can't take accountability, that breaks the patriarchal fantasy for her. And that type of abandonment, that type of emotional abuse, it breaks the fantasy. It breaks the fantasy forever. You can't come back and repair that if you really go down the path of abandonment and harm and deflection like that. So he bankrupts through the abandonment and the deflection and the attacking her and the gaslighting her and the degrading her and just constantly moving the conversation. She's like X, Y, and Z, and he's like Alphabet City outside. It's this constant, just move the conversation, move the goalposts, all to deflect from him having to say, yeah, I abandoned my responsibilities and I consumed from you, and now that I need to participate, I would rather tell everyone that you're a wicked witch who never was good enough for anything. I would rather tarnish you than do my end of the deal. I would rather abandon you than be a man and contribute, right? It's they fall into the teenage sullen me, right? And of course, it's narcissists. Narcissists are in a state of arrested development. They fall into total emotional collapse before they take accountability, right? Good times. Let me just check my notes here. Yeah, so he bankrupts the currency of serving out of love. He cheapened it all. He reduced her to a service, and he made her feel disposable. Everything she did out of true love, he was like, that was disposable. That was a service. I was just eating, consuming, because that's my job. I'm a consumer. I'm a man, right? And she's left knowing that the service wasn't love to him. It was receiving free labor without gratitude, recognition, appreciation. It was him serving his rampant desire for consumption, under the assumption that she is cheap and disposable while he is valuable and important. Customer is king, right? Yeah, protecting his status quo of consumption without contribution is more important than love and participation to patriarchal men. Breaks the fantasy for women. And like once that fantasy is broken, the woman sees him for who he truly is. A black hole, an abyss of consumption that can never be full, No matter how much she pours into him, it will never be full. And he will never be able to reciprocate until he does the internal work of learning how to meet these needs for himself, of maturing, right? And narcissists don't like to do that. Yeah. Yeah, so patriarchy is all about cheap masculinity that only consumes and must receive more than it gives in order to continue, right? And so the cheapest response when women are like, no, you have to be accountable, you have to get out. I am not doing this anymore. I am not an infinite well for you to come and service your needs and take. Like, no, that's not what I'm doing. That violates the male side of the fantasy, right? That he's entitled to, that the only purpose in her life, the only reason women exist is to create for men. Create babies, create life. Why would she even think to invest in her own self? Why would she think that her life has purpose if she's not serving a man? Where did those ideas come from? Right? So he feels that his fantasy is being violated when she's like, enough, get the heck out. Get out of my house, get out. And when she walks through the fire, because he'll make it as expensive as possible, right? And that's any relationship, once again, sibling, romantic, whatever. They will make it as expensive as possible because the number one thing is I need to reassert this fantasy that I am innately superior. You have the option to leave and you are doing it. No matter how much I am throwing at you, how expensive I'm trying to make it, how emotionally taxing I try to make it, you're still forging out to close out this relationship with me. I can't handle that. As a man, I am innately superior. I am the arbiter of value. You have to do what I say. You have to play your part. You have to console me for my failures to you, right? And when that doesn't happen, that fantasy is violated for men. And so that's like a large part of the male loneliness crisis and, why like men have higher rates of offing themselves, especially after divorce. It's because that fantasy is broken on their end. That it wasn't enough to just be a consumer and not be actively violent in the home. That isn't partnership, that isn't love. Right? And so when that fantasy is broken for them, you can go into total collapse. And I am not mental health is no joke. And I do believe men are helpable. They are, but they have to help themselves first. So I'm not pro that, happening to men, but I can't prevent that from happening to a man who can't help himself and face these dynamics. So the answer when men have their patriarchal fantasies violated, the cheapest way to restore the fantasy is through violence and sabotage. Whether that's sabotaging her reputation. Oh, she's a terrible mother. I've been fighting her in court for custody. He's not fighting her in court for custody. He's going to court to try and reduce his child care payments. He's going to court just to make sure she has lawyer fees. Violence and sabotage. That is how they react. And that's what we're seeing on our political landscape, right? So I just talked about how this is playing out on the individual scales because the fantasy is broken for women. They realize men just consumed and everything they consumed, the woman, she lost, right? She devoted it to him. He took it and didn't care. In whatever relationship that panned out in. Then men are facing their fantasy being violated by, why can she leave me? why would she even think that, like, what purpose could her life have outside of me being centered? Like, that's a violation to them. And so when that's violated, the fastest way is sabotage and violence, like to reassert male-centeredness. I will become such a threat and such a harming drain that you have to focus on me, right? And we're seeing that play out in the collective scale, right? So as we're seeing patriarchal backlash to women, you know, rescinding abortion rights, attempts to disenfranchise voters whose name on the birth certificate doesn't match their current name, 90% of married women, that the act failed, but like these are policy initiatives that they're going to keep doing, right? And so we're seeing all this, and that's like the collective patriarchal backlash. And when we see men like J.D. Vance and Elon Musk and all the MAGA crowd coming out and saying, you know, what value do childless women have? Like, what could their life mean? What they are saying is, what value could a woman have when she's not serving a man? When her whole life isn't predicated on the uncompensated manufacturing for male consumption? What could she like, and they use children as a messaging to wrap it up, to be like, I care about babies. They don't care about babies. They do not care about babies at all. If they cared about babies, it'd be about free preschool for all. It'd be about free school lunches. It would be about things that really support child development. We wouldn't be doing voucher programs to, you know, drain public education funds and blah, 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 blah. It's all about control of women, because in the patriarchal world order, men need women. They need to own women as a factory to create their life for them, to do all of the work of life so that they can be free to focus on career, passion, and hanging out with the buds. And we're seeing that all over the road. So when we see more and more attacks against childless women, what that really is how dare you exist if your purpose isn't serving a man so that he doesn't have to do the labor to meet his own needs? How dare you exist outside of the fantasy that women exist for male consumption? How dare you? These men see women, like single childless women, as factories in need of an owner. So that's our political landscape. I talk about all this stuff and more over at my Substack, powerculturecoco.substack.com. And like and subscribe for more. We're doing more weekly videos about breaking down these kind of gnarly dynamics, because we want to uproot all the core of supremacy within ourselves so we can create new structures outside that are equitable, fair, and just not this dog shit. So cool, yeah, I got more stuff on Twitter. I'm having a really hard time making a Twitter. I know I'm late to the game. I'm really trying, but they have this like crazy, I have dyscalculia and I can't figure out their weird visual confirmation you're a human. So maybe I'm not a human. That was a side rant. On TikTok, I'm at Coco Has Ideas. Like and subscribe for more videos coming. And please let me know your thoughts in the comments. I really do appreciate it.